Okay, we're live. We're live broadcasting live from All-Merciful Saviour Monastery. I'm here with Abbot Tryphon, who you all know. Usually I'm not Abbot Tryphon. He's Abbot Tryphon. The last time we had Abbot Tryphon on the stream, we did it. We did it remote, and he was here and I was at home. And we were talking about the importance of male friendship. And it just so happens to be that this weekend we're having a Brotherhood retreat here at the monastery. And so I came up for the Brotherhood of St. John of the Salish Sea. I came up for the retreat to have some male friendship, and
20 young men are here.
A lot of young men, and we've been enjoying each other's company. I don't think you need do we need an introduction for you, Abbot?
Probably not.
Okay, so we can skip the introduction. Everybody knows who Abbot Tryphon is.
It will be an hour, and then you can have a sigh of relief.
You can see he's a little haggard. He's a little tired right now. He's been talking to us. He's been giving edifying talks to us the whole weekend.
What do you mean I'm haggard looking?
You look tired.
Oh, do I?
Yeah. So the topic we've chosen today for the stream is the Orthodox approach to evangelism. And Abbot Tryphon has at times referred to himself as an evangelist. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So why do you say that about yourself?
Well, I would have to say that one of the biggest inspirations for me in my journey into Orthodoxy were the Vashon monks that moved to Alaska. Many years ago, there was both the Seattle Museum, I think it was at the Washington State Center, and also the Tacoma Art Museum, or History Museum rather, had at the same time documents that were being shown, one from the Tsar and the other one from the Patriarch of Moscow, that were directed towards the monks that were coming to serve the Russian fur traders in Alaska. And both of them essentially said the same thing. You will respect the indigenous people. You will learn their languages. You will share your Orthodox faith with them only when they ask. You will not foist it on them. And to this day, I have met Native Americans down in the lower 48 who know about that and appreciate the fact that only the Orthodox Church treated the indigenous people in Alaska with love and respect. As the natives were sharing their faith with these Russian monks from Vashon, the monks were listening with respect and learning, I guess, as I said, their languages. And then at some point, natives started asking the monks, what do you believe? And by then, the monks know so much about the indigenous religions that they were able to say, well, you believe this and we believe this, and these are the parallels. And when we think about it, because we all have the same Father that is looking over us, the creator of the cosmos, all of us, regardless of location or ethnic background or even religion, we have elements of truth. And so the Russian monks had imparted to the natives the parallels and similarities between their beliefs and our beliefs. And eventually that led to the natives embracing Orthodoxy. And so a few years ago, I was in Alaska at the invitation of the late Archbishop David, and I spoke to the clergy of the Alaskan Archdiocese. in a retreat format. And probably 33 of the maybe 40 priests, I could be wrong on the numbers, were indigenous. And that was really the result of what happened during the time when Saint Herman of Alaska, Saint Innocent were there. That this is where they gleaned this orthodoxy. One of the native priests told me something interesting. He said that when the United States sold Alaska or when the United States purchased Alaska from Russia, the Russian government didn't think that they were selling Alaska. They were selling the Russian-American company. But unfortunately, typical of a lot of our historical past as a country, with regards to indigenous people, we saw ourselves as purchasing Alaska, and we now own it. And so it was subdivided into thirds, and the American government established residential schools, and then they forced Native people and their children to move out of Native villages into the school. And then they had, I think it was a Methodist and a Presbyterian and an Episcopalian churches were running the schools on behalf of the government. And essentially they separated the children from their parents, from their culture. The children were forced to speak English. They were often beaten if they spoke the native languages. They were not allowed to even carry on the cultures of their native people, of their native tribes, in everything from hair length to dress. And it had a long-term damaging effect on Native peoples. But prior to that, the Russians, when they did have these people convert, the Russian government saw them, once anybody was Orthodox, as full members and citizens of the Russian Empire, with all the benefits and protections of being a member of that empire. So if, for instance, one of the Russian fur traders made an accusation against a native, he would not be judged by them, but they would have to wait until a judge came from Russia to preside over it, because the native was considered a full member of the Russian nation. That was a completely different thing than happened down here in the lower 48s, as we all know. So I remember when we first moved to Vashon Island, I met a native from one of the local tribes here, and he was a Presbyterian, but he was also the native medicine man. And he was the one that first told me about the difference between the two. So it wasn't me having to go to Alaska to learn this. I was told this by a native of the Washington state that this was true. And I was so inspired by that I decided that since there is a tradition in Orthodoxy of monks being missionaries, that I wanted to be a missionary on this island and in the Pacific Northwest, where there are, especially on this island when we moved here, there were no Orthodox Christians on this island. So I've been committed to evangelism since then.
And you mentioned Saint Herman. How do people remember Saint Herman, and what is his legacy as a missionary?
Well, Saint Herman was not a priest. He was a simple monk. And he had such a positive impact on the indigenous people of Alaska, partly because as many of them were dying either from intertribal wars or from diseases that the white men had brought in, it meant there were many orphans. And so a lot of these orphans were taken in by St. Herman. And he essentially built an orphanage on Spruce Island. And he was essentially became like their grandfather. And when he reposed, many natives actually saw his soul being taken up into heaven. And he was venerated as a saint almost from the very beginning, before the church collectively and universally pronounced him as a saint. And the natives were already praying for his intercession. So he had a really positive impact. But as did the other Russian monks that were there. They were people who really loved the native people, and in turn, the native people knew they were loved and respected by the Russian monks, and they returned that. I have to tell you that the time that I was in Alaska with these native clergy was a time of joy. I remember when I asked Archbishop David before I gave my talk at this retreat center if I could rearrange the seating. All the seats were kind of lined up like we would have in a theater. And he said, well, you can do whatever you want to do. So I asked all of the priests that were there to stand and take their chairs and form a giant circle. And then I sat within that circle on one of the part of that circle. And so I addressed all of them. I have an opening line. One of the proto-deacons was wearing a sort of a reddish purple robe, cassock. And he looked very much like the Dalai Lama. So I had him sit right next to me. And when I stood up to begin my talk, I asked him to stand up next to me. And I bowed my head to him and I said, I want you to know that I am greatly honored to have the Dalai Lama here. And all of the priests burst into laughter. And the next morning, this deacon came up to me and he said that when he got home, he told his wife what I had said. And he said, my wife is now calling me Your Holiness.
I bet they were in the palm of your hand after you said that in the audience.
Well, you know what? The reason why I had this big circle is because the circle has been a standard on this continent for native gatherings. When and there would be many of the tribes had traditions of the peace pipe. So whoever was holding the pipe was the one that was speaking at the moment. And before anyone else could speak, they had to have the pipe passed on to them. So I knew that was an important part of the indigenous heritage. And I wanted to respect that indigenous heritage by forming a circle.
Okay. So it sounds like you are continuing in the tradition of the Russian missionaries who had come to the Americas. That's what you're.
I have asked these Russian saints to be with me in this monastery from the beginning, and it has been my goal to imitate them as best I can.
Okay. And so you have this approach, loving the natives and respecting their, what they have already, and showing them what about it is Orthodox. How is this approach different from the Western approach? What is the Western approach? What is the Eastern approach to evangelism? How do they differ?
Well, first of all, because the Russian monks were ordered by the Tsar and the Patriarch to honor and respect the indigenous people, they bothered to find out that the totem poles were like imparting history of the tribes. Whereas when the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the Episcopalians and later the Catholics moved into Alaska, they chopped down a lot of the totem poles because they saw them as idols. I remember one time when I was driving in Seattle with a visiting Protestant minister, And Seattle has a lot of totem poles because we have a large indigenous indigenous people in this area. So there are a lot of totem poles. And as we were passing one of them, this minister who is from out of state made a comment about him. And he says, "Oh, look, there's one of those idols, the native idols. Why would they have those up here?" And I pointed out that no, they're not idols. In fact, I know on that Vashon Island, one of the carvers, a native man who's a carver of totem poles, who's very famous and considered one of the best. So I've talked to him about this, the importance of the totem poles as imparting history of the tribes. And so the Russians knew that right from the beginning. But when these others came in there, they were, "Oh, we can't have these idols." So they got rid of them. And the other difference was that the Russian monks would see the similarities in belief. So rather than seeing these native people as pagans that needed to be converted, they saw the truth that these people had, and they saw themselves as Orthodox Christians as having the fullness of absolute truth. But having the fullness of absolute truth brings with it the need to share the fullness of truth with those around us. But sometimes that takes time, and especially it takes honor, that we must honor these people and let them know that we care for them, we love them, and we honor their culture and their religion. That doesn't mean we think their religion is salvific. It means that we're not going to condemn them as pagans. And as happened with many of the Catholic missionaries, both in Canada and on the west coast of California, there became even known, sadly enough, baptism by blood. So it would be better that a native be killed for the sake of salvation than actually loved into the faith. One of the first martyrs, St. Peter the Aleut, went with a bunch of the Russian fur traders down into Northern California. And they ended up in San Francisco. And St. Peter the Aleut is actually buried in a common burial mound behind the Mission Dolores, which is the oldest and most famous mission in San Francisco. It was a Franciscan mission. And the story is told that when he refused to be baptized Roman Catholic, and he pointed out that he had the cross of the Orthodox Church around his neck because he was a baptized Orthodox Christian, and that he would not convert, they took 4 horses and they tied his feet and his arms and pulled his body apart in front of the Mission Dolores and buried him in a common grave with other natives in the back. One thing I did years ago is I took a couple of monastic friends with me, and we went. The mission is a place where you can go to. Tourists go there a lot, and you can stroll in the back where the cemetery is. And so we went back in the cemetery where there is the indigenous burial ground with no signs or posts. There's no tombstones or anything to identify it as that, but that's where they were. And we did a service to St. Peter the Aleut, and nobody asked us to leave, or nobody tried to drag us out, but we were fully prepared not to go easily.
Okay, so the Western approach is to pull people apart with horses, and the Eastern approach is to love them into the kingdom. Is that accurate?
That would be absolutely accurate. Now, I'm not saying that I've known any Western Christians today that have threatened anybody with 4 horses and a bunch of rope, but there is a history of that, especially in California and in Canada.
Okay. Now, another way of reaching out, church traditionally, we have services. The services are open. People are invited to come to church. And the preacher preaches from the church. Now, you have started doing something that is almost unique for monastics. I don't really know very many, if any, other monastics who are using the internet to reach out and evangelize the people. You have a blog, well-known blog, The Morning Offering. You have your YouTube channel, and you've been doing this for many years and very effectively. So I think it is a lot of people out here are really curious about using the internet. So what do you have to say about using the internet as a tool for evangelism?
Well, first of all, when I first started doing this, I had no knowledge at all of the internet. I didn't even have a laptop. And then when I did get a laptop, I really didn't know how to use it. I mean, I am an old man, you know. But one of the things that really impacted me in my role as becoming a missionary on the internet was the former Patriarch of Moscow, I'm trying to think of his name, Alexei, charged his bishops. He said, we need to use the internet because if the church doesn't use the internet, only the devil will use the internet. And when I heard that, I thought, that's absolutely true. One of the banes of our society, especially for our young people, but even older people now, is the internet and cell phones. It's destroyed that bonding and that interconnection that used to be there. And we don't see much of that anymore. And so when I first started doing a blog article, which I did a few times a week initially, I got a lot of blowback from that. People were, what's a monk doing on the internet? What's a monk doing on social media? And so I would quote the patriarch as my reason for doing this. But over time, as increasing numbers of people, like on Facebook alone, I think I have 44,000 followers, although I've branched out into other medium just because I have been blocked by Facebook 2 times, where they just stopped me cold. Once I was banned for a month, and then I was told that if I did anything controversial again, that I would be permanently banned. So I branched out to other beings that, to keep my ability to speak to people. But what I realized is that there are, partly because of the reduced what's the word? In fact, I'm demonstrating it now.
Attention span?
Attention span. Yes, that's it. I just demonstrated a reduced attention span. Short talks and short articles are far more valuable. And so my blog articles are short, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 paragraphs. And one of the things that I realized early on is that most people don't have the time or the desire to read any theological works by the fathers or by modern Orthodox writers. You can give them the book and they'll look at it. Maybe they'll read a page or 2 and then that's it. And the books stack up. But if you give them short little things to read, they're more likely to read them. And the other thing that I realized early on is that there are a lot of profound teachings of the church that are better introduced to the populace and to the Orthodox believers with little short snippets that are more concise and simple and people are going to get them. And so, one of the problems with a lot of Orthodox churches today is that there's only a few churches that have a catechetical program of bringing non-Orthodox into the church and thoroughly training them. I've known too many priests over the years that will take, Timothy Ware's book, Orthodox Church or Orthodox Way, and hand them to somebody that's interested in becoming Orthodox and say, read this book, and when you're done, come to me and we'll chrismate you or baptize you. But that really doesn't tell them much about the faith. Orthodoxy is far more just beautiful churches and beautiful liturgical expressions and beautiful vestments. Orthodoxy is a faith that must be centered in Jesus Christ. And in order to have it centered in Jesus Christ, it means that we have to go deep into the heart. And when we need to understand what the faith is, what differentiates us from, say, the denominations out there. That's important. And so that was my goal, is to make it more palatable to people, so they can understand profound teachings of the church in a simple way.
So his, for those, in case you don't know, his blog, Abbot Tryphon's blog, is on his website, abbottryphon.com. And those blog posts are fire. So if you haven't checked those out, you should check them out. There's if you guys who are watching, please hit like. I've seen them got quite a few likes, so I'm happy with that. But hit like if you're watching, and you can also start thinking of questions. If you this will be your chance. If you want to ask Abbot Tryphon a question, send it in. We also have a few people in the room with us who might come up with some questions. So now. But my question is, we're sitting here, this on your blog, you always post a picture or two, right? Is this photograph behind you? Is that your photography?
Yes.
So he's a professional photographer on top of being an abbot of a monastery.
Over on this side are my paintings.
I was going to get to that.
Oh, you were?
Yes. Me and Brother Basil were talking about this. So, and the what we were talking about is the different things that bring people into the church. Some people have an analytical mind, or they like to read theology. So some people might be using their reason and their rationality, and that can draw people to the church. Some people love music, and the music of the church is so beautiful. Some people like art, maybe iconography or photography, whatever it takes, right, to get people interested. I told Brother Basil that, like it and believe it or not, the fasting practices of the church was what interested me, was what drew me into the church. So could you talk about using aesthetics and beauty and this kind of thing here? Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, when we first moved to Vashon Island and we acquired this 16 acres that we have, the land had been cleared of the forest. And an old friend of mine from my college days, Russell Kane, came to visit from Portland. And we were standing up in the clearing, and Russell said that when we were in college, that he remembers me saying that someday I wanted to live on an island in a forest communally. Of course, back in the 60s, communal meant something entirely different. But here I am. By God's grace and mercy, I am living in the center of a forest on an island surrounded by the Salish Sea. And I have a community of brothers. There are 6 of us here. And I am grateful to God for being here. I grew up in northern Idaho on Pend Oreille Lake. We had a house on Pend Oreille Lake. And my dad was a golf pro. And so a good much of my youth was spent playing golf on a golf course. And we had a neighbor by the name of Ross Hall, who was a very famous photographer of the rank of Ansel Adams. And one of my earliest jobs was I would accompany him on his hikes in the forests or the mountain areas around Sandpoint, helping packing his photographic equipment. I even spent a summer working in his darkroom. So when I went off to college, I became the school photographer, and I had my own darkroom. So photography has been a very important part of my life since I was 14. The photograph that's behind me is really demonstrates the eye that Ross Hall gifted to me. When I take photographs, especially scenic photography, I'm fully aware that it's Ross Hall who taught me how to do that. He actually gave me my first Pentax camera. My blog all began with a young man who lives on the island who was a computer programmer in Seattle, and he told me one day that his boss had told him, "You cannot have that icon on your table, and you cannot on your desk, and you cannot have the Bible sitting here. I don't want any religion here." It didn't matter that there was a young Muslim woman who was dressed in her traditional Islamic head covering, but he couldn't have his Bible there. And he was disappointed because he had the habit when he started work of reading the gospel and epistle readings according to the church calendar. So I said, "Well, I'll tell you what I'll do." I said, "Are you allowed to read your blog during the day, or your check your email?" And he said, "Yes." So I said, "Well, what I'll do is I will copy the epistle and gospel readings for the day, and I will post them to you." And then one day when I visited his office and saw this horrid little cubicle with gray and white colors in the room, I thought, he needs some color. So I started taking photographs that I would send to him at the same time. And then he one day said, "Oh, I've got some friends that would like to be there. Would you connect them?" And pretty soon it kept building and building and building with the number of people that were on that email list for the epistle and gospel readings and for the photographs that I would send out. And then I was talking to a friend on the island about it. And he said, "Well, you're in danger of being seen as spam and you will be dumped. Why don't you start a blog?" And I said, "Well, what's a blog?" I had no idea. And so he told me, and I said, "Would you help set up a blog for me?" And he did. And so I've been writing blog articles 7 days a week ever since. In fact, a few times when I was in the hospital, I had my laptop with me and I was still, cranking out blogs. Once, just at the beginning, when I wanted people to know that I needed their prayers, I actually took a photograph with my cell phone and posted it on my blog with me propped up in the hospital gown in a hospital. And I think I got a little bit of sympathy, and I'm sure I got a lot of prayers because I lived through that. So I don't go anywhere. If I travel on speaking engagements, I have my laptop with me, and I still do my blog, and I still take photographs. And I started adding these photographs because I think that most people need to be inspired visually, not just by words, but by beautiful scenes. And so I've taken numerous photographs of Mount Rainier that can be seen from our island. When I've gone through our many trails on this island, Vashon Island has probably 100 miles of trails, and I've hiked many of them. And I always have my cell phone with me, and I'm always taking pictures, and often I use those pictures along with my blogs. I take pictures in the church. I take pictures of visitors. The young men that are here, the 20 young men that are here for the Salish Brotherhood retreat, have been featured on my blog the past 2 days, because I want to inspire people that read my blog by having them see that there is hope for the world, because these young men that are here are the future of the church. And And I'm obviously not the future of the church at 77. So these guys are the future, and I want people to see them, and I want them to feel inspired by them. And the other day, I even posted, we have on Vashon Island something that's called Visual Vashon Delights. And there are hundreds of people that post daily photos of flowers in their garden, or forest trails, or scenes of Mount Rainier off in the distance over the Salish Sea. And so I thought about it, and we had a group photo taken. So I decided to post it. And the response that I got was incredible. People were saying, wow, it's inspiring to see all these young men who are Christians. I even posted a photograph of all the monks, the 6 of us, with our church in the background. That was the one that I was real hesitant about posting, because I didn't want anybody on the island to think I was trying to foist my religion on them. But what I said was, in the introductory sentence, was, I want you all to know how grateful we are that we live in a community surrounded by such wonderful people. And that got something like 271 likes, which is one of the highest I've seen of any photograph on Visual Vashon Delight. So I was relieved that there was no negative feedback. It was all positive feedback, including someone who said that we love having you here too, and others that posted with the little red hearts. So again, it's not, we don't, as Orthodox Christians, we do not want to hide our faith under a bushel. That doesn't mean that, like the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, were out pamphleting everybody, because that doesn't work. Debate doesn't work. I was a debater in high school and college, and I can tell you that if you cannot debate both sides equally, you'll never be a champion debater. And so the problem is that if you are trying to convince relatives or your parents or your friends the truth of orthodoxy by debating them, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. My own parents, when I first embraced orthodoxy and became a monk and left my previous profession, my mother particularly was very upset that her son was no longer wearing 3-piece suits. Her son now was dressing weirdly. And as she put it one day, "You look like a hippie." And so I knew there was nothing I could say or do that convinced my parents of the truth of orthodoxy, even though they had become unhappy Lutherans. So one day I wrote their names down on a piece of paper, and I put it under an icon of the Holy Virgin in our temple. And I asked the Holy Virgin to be their mother and take care of them and draw them to the church. And then I started praying to God to make me the very best son I could be. And I made that a goal. And so I started calling them at least once a week. "How are you doing, Mom and Dad? Missing you guys. What's going on with you?" And I did that for quite a while. And then one day, it was about a month before Western Christmas, and I wanted to send them some gifts. And I remember how when I was in college, my mother would always send me a package with a lot of wonderful little gifts that any college guy would like. So I started looking around, and I bought little food items and little gifty items. And every single one of them I wrapped individually in Christian or Christmas paper. And then I took them all and I started piling them in a box about like this. And in God's divine providence, this friend of mine, Father Gregory Horton from Northern Idaho, was in Seattle, and he came out to the monastery to visit. And he had a parish that he had established in Post Falls, Idaho, St. John the Baptist Orthodox Church. And I asked him if he would be willing to deliver this package to my mother I said, just ring her doorbell, and when she comes to the door, would you hand her this box and tell her that she can open the box, but she has to put all of the little individually wrapped gifts under the tree and not open them until Christmas Day. And I said, and by the way, before you leave, would you give my mother a hug for me? And so he did that. He went to Coeur d'Alene and he rang the doorbell, and my mother came, and there was this priest standing there, and he said, I'm Father Gregory. I'm a friend of your son's, and he asked me to deliver this box. And she invited him in for coffee, and he said, your son wants you to open the box and put all of these little packages under the tree. And my mother was just like a little girl, according to Father Gregory. She was just giggling with delight about putting these little gifts under the tree from her son. And then, before Father Gregory left, he says, oh, by the way, your son wanted me to pass on a hug from him. And so he hugged my mother. And after he left, my mother called me. And the first thing she said was, I have never been hugged by a Lutheran minister. And Father Gregory hugged me. And coming from a family of huggers, that meant a great deal to my mother. And then I was visiting them a short time after that. We were having dinner in their home. And my mother confessed to me that she was very unhappy with their Lutheran church, that they had lost all semblance of reverence. And so she said, we're going to start looking around for another Lutheran church to start attending. And I said, Mom, you've been to every Lutheran church in Coeur d'Alene, including the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church, which is the most conservative. And I said, when you went there, they were doing a praise service. And I said, frankly, the church looks like a modern day steakhouse, and it's in the round. And I said, you didn't like it then, and you're certainly going to not like it now. I said, why don't you guys go to St. John the Baptist Orthodox Church in Post Falls? It's only about 15 or 20 minutes drive from your house. And my mom said, well, maybe someday we'll check it out. And I looked at my dad and I said, Dad, who's the head of a Christian household? And my dad said, well, the husband, of course. And my mother giggled. And I said, Dad, where are you guys going to church on Sunday? St. John the Baptist Orthodox Church. And my mother giggled and my dad rolled his eyes, and they went. And that Sunday afternoon, my mother called and she said they were treated like celebrities when people found out that they were Abbot Tryphon's parents. And within 2 months, they were catechumens. And I went to Coeur d'Alene and baptized my parents into the Orthodox Church along with Father Gregory. And they absolutely loved being Orthodox. My mother had been a professional music teacher. She taught piano and organ. And she was the organist in the Lutheran church that I grew up in Sandpoint. And she directed a choir, about a 40-voice choir on days like Christmas and Easter. And I remember one Sunday she called me and she said that all these people were sitting around talking, and they realized that there were 7 former liturgical church organists in that church that has no organ. And so one of the women said, have enough, we could have a quorum, we could start a chapter of the American Guild of Organists. And Father Gregory said, no, the American Guild of Recovering Organists.
Very good. You mentioned, you were saying about you were in the hospital and soliciting prayers. I've used that trick before, soliciting prayers for my viewers, and it works. So that's a good. Prayer is powerful. Well, here's a question we can get to. Oh, does it show up on this? I don't think you can show them with this, unless, yeah. I don't think you can show them with the YouTube. We're not using StreamYard right now. Okay, so this question is from Orthodox Insights. Does Abbot Tryphon have any suggestions for evangelizing to non-religious family members? You kind of were just talking about that, but some of whom are very cold toward the church.
Well, I recently, was dismissed because I was refusing to be jabbed for the COVID thing. So I lost my position to the fire department and the sheriff's department on Vashon Island as their chaplain, even though I had been the chaplain for 18 years. I was sort of thrown to the road without even a thank you note, which is a very sad thing for me. But I have to tell you that during that 18 years, a good many of my calls were in the middle of the night, my 911 calls. And most of the people on this island, the vast majority, way over 95%, are not churchgoers and not religious. And so what happened while I was there was I had all of these people who were many times, they would say, like, why are you here? I'm not religious. I remember once somebody said, I don't know why you're here. I'm not a religious person, and my husband, who just died, was not religious. And I said, I am here for support, to give you support. And over time, that has had a positive impact on people. Our monastery here, years ago, when we had a contractor steal $47,000 from us, and he never showed up to do anything. And I went to court, and I asked the judge to be merciful to him, and I forgave him, and I hugged him in court, and it ended up in the newspapers. And that was followed by this huge outpouring from this non-religious island. And we had all of our buildings were essentially built by islanders that came every day, Monday through Friday, for well over a year. And now we have the proof. We had enough money in the bank to pay for the lumber and supplies we needed, but we didn't have enough money to pay a contractor. And all of this was done. It was a miracle. But I look at all of what we have in this place with gratitude. But I also know, what was the question that I wanted?
Well, he's talking about evangelizing family members who are cold toward the church.
Okay. And so what I'm saying is that sometimes it's not words that touch people's hearts, but it's love that touches them, that we must be the light of Christ to people around us. And so I'm a member of the International Conference of Police Chaplains and the Federation of Fire Chaplains and the Washington State Police and Fire Chaplaincy. And all of the organizations have a standard rule that as a chaplain, you do not just start praying for somebody you're ministering to or visiting, because you are God's presence in their midst. And you only pray for them if they ask you to pray for them. And so many people end up feeling a tug in their heart for religious faith in situations like that, because of someone who loves on them enough to impart Christ in a real way and not in a forced pamphleteering way. So there's a lot of people that I have known over the years that have actually converted to the Orthodox Church who were, like I was at one time, an atheist. And they were drawn by the beauty of our services and by the love of the priests and the people and the monks and the hospitality that was shown to them when they would, even maybe if it was just in the grocery store, smiling at somebody. For years, I would go to the Saturday market, which is our where people sell their vegetables and their gift items and their paintings. And I would go there and just wander around and visit with people that had these booths, not evangelizing in the sense of, do you know about Orthodoxy? But just being a loving presence in their midst and being supportive of what they were doing to add to their income. by selling their vegetables or their homemade soaps or things like that. And that's the sort of thing we can all do. Another thing I think is really important, and I've told these young men that are here, is that if you're out with your friends and you're about to have a dinner in a restaurant or in their home, and everybody is just diving into their food, in a very simple way, bless your food and make the sign of the cross. God is hearing it, but these people are witnessing it. They're going to start asking questions. Oh, well, what was that about? You're Orthodox. I remember one time a college student, I blessed his dorm room, and I asked him where his icons were, and there was just one tiny little icon sitting on his desk, and I said, "Did you put that out because you knew I was coming?" And he kind of looked a little ashamed, and he said, "Yes." And I said, "Why don't you have a large icon from home here above your desk?" "Well, I don't want to foist my religion on my roommate." And I looked over at the desk of his roommate, and I said, "Why?" "He's got this large poster of Madonna." And the following year, I was blessing the same room. And here is this wall of icons between the two desks, big icons, and a lampada burning oil hanging down. And he said, "He's my roommate." And then the guy that was his roommate said, "I'm now Orthodox because of his icon that he put over his desk." I started asking questions about it. And then I asked him if it was all right if I came to church with him some Sunday. And he says, and then I decided I wanted to be Orthodox. Half these icons are mine, and we went in together to buy the lampada. He says, "I'm the one that had the poster of Madonna over my desk." And he said, "You'll be happy to know that I tore it up and burned it." And I was. I felt a hallelujah coming on.
Hallelujah. Okay. Macarius says, "Father bless."
Blessings of the Lord.
And he has a follow-up question. He has a dilemma that he's trying hard in his life, but he's loving this world, chasing and trying to acquire material things. So if I don't try hard, I feel kind of a void. So maybe the materialistic life is leaving a void for him.
Well, frankly, the material life is going to lead a void for anybody.
Mm.
I know an old man who's actually older than I, if you can believe it, and he's 80, and he lives in a house crammed with junk, and he won't listen to his younger sister about getting rid of stuff and downsizing because, "Oh, I like all that I have." And I told him, I said, "There's nothing in this house of yours that you can take with you when you die. Nothing. And yet you're acting as though this is something that you need to keep by your side for eternity." And I said, "This is not going to happen." Sometimes we need to unburden ourselves with the very things that we thought were necessary in our lives. Things in order to find true happiness and true joy. If you're living in a house full of treasures, but you have not a treasure in your heart and a relationship with Christ, then ultimately you have nothing. You have nothing. So what's really important is that we have our priorities set. Now, having said that, I'm not telling you that you can't have nice things. We have lots of nice things in this monastery. If you're a Greek monastery, you have a lot of nice things because they have a lot of support, financial support and otherwise. So the Greek monasteries that I have a close relationship with on the West Coast are beautiful places filled with beautiful art, beautiful icons and pillars and marble and everything. But the center of what those nuns and monks have is Christ. And if they had to live in a tent, they would be happy because they have Christ. And that's why so many of the early monks lived in caves. There were cases of wealthy people, even royalty, that would walk away from all of that and embrace monasticism and live in a cave with virtually nothing, because that is what means something for eternity. You can take that with you beyond your death, but you can't take anything else. So it's not like you have to get rid of nice things in your life, but you do not want to let them dominate you. You do not let them make you what you are. Those are external things that can be comfortable to have around you or inspire you because of the beauty of the art, but don't let it be the center of your life. Jesus Christ must be the center of your life.
Brother Augustine says prayer hands emoji. You know Brother Augustine.
Yes.
Here's an interesting question for me.
We need to talk, brother.
Rise says, I have many family members that suffer from mental illnesses, from severe OCD to paranoid schizophrenia. And I want a balanced view of the situation for myself and my loved ones.
I had someone ask me one day about what about somebody that is schizophrenic, or someone who has severe mental health problems, and that they can't even relate to their loved ones, let alone with God. What about them? What does that mean for them and for eternity? Well, what we do know about God is that God is a loving Father. And so one of the images that comes to my mind is the little boy that walks into the room and he holds his little fist up and he says, "Daddy, I hate you." And a bad father would slap him across the face and send him to his room and tell him, "You're not going to get dinner tonight." But a loving father would embrace the little boy, pick him up, hold him tight, kiss him on the forehead and say, "But Daddy loves you." And this is our Father in heaven. He loves us in spite of ourselves. And so there are people in our lives sometimes, or people that we see or know about, who have severe mental problems to the degree that they can't even relate closely or have a close bond with other people, let alone with God. But I really believe in my heart that God understands that, and that God will take that into account. Just like he takes into account someone who was physically and sexually abused as a child and has difficulty as an adult relating to others in a positive way. God takes that into account as well, which is one of the reasons why anyone who has ever abused a child or anyone else, sexually or otherwise, needs to repent and ask God's forgiveness. And they need to ask the persons that they did this to for forgiveness. I remember once a woman told me that she had been sexually abused by her grandfather. And it had had such a terrible impact on her life that she became obese just to protect herself. And she said she didn't know what to do. She said, "I can't." She said, "During the time he was abusing me, my mother and my grandmother didn't believe me, but he did it to me." And my recommendation to her was to write a letter to her grandfather and tell him that, confront him about, "This is what you did to me. This is the impact that you've had on my life. And I forgive you. And then I'm going to walk away." And I said, "Take it to his grave and light it on fire and walk away." And she did that. And it helped her for closure. So there's all kinds of things we can do. But most of all, we need to remember that just because somebody has that kind of experience or has that kind of a problem, we have to know that God loves them, and we pray for them, and we pray for their salvation, and then we leave it up to God to take care of them. I have a question here.
Yeah. Well, first off, I was thinking about Maricos's question, and I think more of what he was asking about is the pursuit of material things rather than
Macarius.
rather than actually having material things. I think he's talking about this drive to, acquire material things or positions of honor and things like that, and then he learns that these things aren't going to last and aren't going to go into heaven with him. But he finds that if he isn't engaging in those activities, he feels a void in his life. And how would he go about remedying that?
Let me repeat the question. So we have someone sitting in the room with us. He asked, referring to Macarius's question, what if you're not, if you don't pursue the material things, then you feel a void. What do you do to fill that void? Is that about what you said?
Yeah, like you feel an emptiness when you're not pursuing these.
What
these
if you feel
things.
an emptiness when you're not pursuing, these material things?
I think that's the time that you need to go fishing. Get on a boat and go fishing. I think that's one of the things that I learned early on is because in my younger years, I was a long distance runner. And I loved long distance running because I was alone when I was running. And when I lived in Portland, there was a place called what was the name of that? It was a long 28-mile hike. And I used to try to run that once every month or once every 2 months. And I loved running alone because not only was I taking in the surrounds of this beautiful forest, but it just sort of gave me a proper sense of what should be valued and what shouldn't be valued. And another thing that I used to do back then is I used to go to the Oregon coast and run on the beach or go sit on the shoreline and just take in the beauty of the ocean. So if you are having struggle, feeling like you need to be working hard to bring material things into your life, a good way to counteract that would be to start bringing in nature into your life.
Okay.
Is that enough?
Yeah, Macarius confirms that was his original question. And what it makes me think about is maybe this is something obviously more than one people or persons are thinking about. And it's, you come into the church and Christ says, go sell and give everything to the poor and come follow me. We read monastic books and the monks don't have anything. So people start feeling maybe, they feel bad because they're not being monks. They're not giving away everything. They're living a life in the world. Is it okay? Can we, you kind of need to, provide for your family and so forth, right?
Yes, but again, it's like I remember growing up, my dad's, the most memorable thing I have that I remember about my dad's fathering my brother and I was when we would go on camping trips together and how much I looked forward to those. And we would set up the tent and we would eat over the campfire and we would go swimming in Ponderay Lake. And it wasn't about acquiring a nicer house or more stuff. It was moments like that I felt the closest to my parents and to my brother. And I think that putting our emphasis on acquiring material things may have its place, but there's so much that we can acquire from nature and from the arts that don't depend on money or income, but actually will ultimately have a bigger effect on us in a positive way.
If I can add to that, I've been reading the book of Proverbs, and it says, get wisdom, and all you're getting, get knowledge, this kind of thing. Is that something, would that be maybe a good pursuit? Get wisdom?
Yes.
Yeah. I actually have a question, one further question. Let's see. Deep. We have a question from Carl. I have deep trouble and hurt at the moment. The person I have loved all my life, have proposed to, etc., has now been engaged to another man behind my back and is now accusing me of sexual abuse. That's kind of a sensitive subject. I don't know.
I think that would be something that I would rather address personally.
Okay.
At emailing me at abbottryphon@vashonmonks.com.
There you go. Okay, Carl. So you can contact Abbot Tryphon, Carl. My question was, do you have advice for me or for content creators in general? Do you have any input how I can do this better? Or, I assume you've been, following me at some distance, at least, seeing what I'm doing. Do you have any advice for people who are making content for the internet?
Make whatever you are contributing on the internet Christ-centered. One of the problems with the internet is that there are a lot of people who think that their friendships are on the internet. They'll say, "Oh, I've got 400 friends on the internet," and are they friends? Do you even know them? Is the photo that this person has placed for everybody to see their photo, or is it something else? One of the terrible tragedies in our society right now are the number of sex predators who are posing as young people and children to woo people that they want to, exploit into their circle. We've got to be careful about stuff like that, but we also be careful that what we do has a positive impact on eternity for us. I think that one of the things that can impact that, things like photography and painting and poetry, things that have beauty that had. They didn't have TVs. They didn't have the internet. At the turn of the century, the average family had a piano or a violin or both. And families would often gather together with their neighbors or friends to play music together and sing. I can remember my grandmother in Spokane, who she played the honky-tonk piano and the drums and the banjo and the guitar and the ukulele. And whenever we would go over there to her house as kids, she would bring out all those instruments and we would have a wonderful time with her. It wasn't about watching a television show. It was about being with grandma and getting into music together. So these are simple things that we can do that we should, if we're not doing them now, we should return to. How much time do we have?
Well, we can go. I mean, I didn't want to go beyond an hour and a half. It's been up to an hour and 10 minutes. If you're getting tired, we can, anytime we can, just say goodbye. For those watching, again, we're taking questions if you want. Does anybody in the audience here? We have another question. You had one, so let's see.
Okay. So in Orthodox Christianity,
Speak up real loud.
Sure.
We're gonna have to repeat it anyways.
So in Orthodox Christianity, is in general is like as far as like martyrdom and such. if you're starting a family and you're a husband, you have kids and that sort of thing, what is your role as far as how you protect your family? How as the husband, would you be protecting your wife and kids as far as, your role as a parent?
Well, I have to say that I am one of those that believes that that we should homeschool our children. I am deeply disturbed by what's happening to our public schools. I think this
It says sound has been lost. Are you still not hearing us?
Did you
Hit something unplugged when you moved it.
No, the mute button's fine. Are people hearing us in the sound glitches? Let us know if you have good sound. Are you hearing us now? Can you hear me now?
It looks like you have sound.
If they can't hear us, you might have to type.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah, there's like a 20-second.
Oh, it's just the internet. It's just an internet
Yeah.
glitch. Okay, so
it
sorry.
was probably the CIA.
So you were starting to answer the question. You were answering the question.
I think that homeschooling be essential to raising up children with normalcy. Our school systems across the country, and especially depending on what state you're in and how woke they might be, are having a devastatingly negative impact on children. Look at how many states and cities now have laws where if a child announces to a school teacher that he is really not the sex that he is, but another sex, that the teachers are allowed to keep that a secret from the parent. And if a child wants to be transitioned into another sex and the parent is in opposition to it, the child can actually be taken away by the state. I cannot believe that we have school teachers today that would put up with that kind of garbage. So oftentimes the only way to protect our children is by homeschooling. Another thing that we can do as parents is monitor our children's online interactions, because again, I said earlier that there are so many predators out there. And so the average child comes home from school and he goes to his room and he opens up his laptop, and who knows what he's watching or whom he is communicating with. A parent needs to watch carefully. One of the recommendations that I have given over the years to parents is that when your children come home and when you come home from work, take your laptop or your cell phones and turn them off and put them in a basket for the night, for the evening, so that you can have real, genuine family time together. And don't allow your children to go into their bedroom with their laptops. If they've got schoolwork to do on a laptop, have them do it in the living room where you're all there together. It's sort of like a mirror of what would happen at the turn of the century, where children would study at a desk in the kitchen and mom is cooking food, or they're all sitting around in the living room and mom and dad are reading a book, and so are the children. They're reading their book or they're doing their studies, and they're there in case they need mom or dad to help them with their studies. We have gone so far away from that, and that's a tragedy. But it's reversible, but not on the grand scale. I think we've gone too far down as a nation and as a world, but we can still rescue our children from that kind of input or exploitation, if you will.
Okay, we have another question. Alec Kendall says that I will be moving to Alaska 9 hours away from the nearest parish. How can we continue to practice our faith on our own away from the church?
That's a difficult one, and if you normally I would require or would request people not do that, because if you're living apart from the church and from the celebration of the divine liturgy, that can be a real problem spiritually. On the other hand, we Orthodox have a tradition of the father being the sort of domestic priest. So if you have children, make sure that you have an icon wall with the children's saints' days, patron saints, your patron saints, your wife's patron saint, along with various family icons. And in the morning when you get up, light the lampada and let the lampada burn the entire day. And every time you walk into your living room, you know that you are in the presence of God. And then make sure that you do the morning and evening prayers together collectively as a family. And teach your children to use the Jesus prayer, so that if they're out on a walk or a run even, they can be saying, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner. And these are the kinds of things that can help strengthen your faith your Orthodox faith, when you are living far from an Orthodox community.
You have a question?
Yeah. You want me to talk into that, or? That's fine.
It messed up last time. We'll just leave it.
Yeah. What does it mean to be a man according to the Gospels? And why does it matter being a man or a woman if there's no male or female in heaven?
Okay, the question is, what does it matter to be a man according to the Gospels? And why does it matter if there's no male or female in heaven?
Because God created us male and female. He created us. And so what happens in heaven when there's no reproduction, it doesn't matter. I mean, what matters is what God created us here and now. If God created you a male, then you live your life as a male in this life. If he created you as a female, you live your life. One of the things that I think that I remember about in the 1950s is that it was a time when most women were stay-at-home moms. And I can remember going with my neighborhood friends and to have a piece of cake. I remember one woman that lived a few houses away from us, and she did something different than my mother did. My mother was one of these that when she would make a double layered chocolate cake, it had very thin icing. And this woman, my friend Larry's mother, made very thick icing. And I really liked going there and I would try to get my mother to do thick icing. And no, it's too much sugar. I'm not going to do that. Well, I loved going over there. But the beautiful thing about that time was that neighborhoods were full of families, and children were playing in the yard or riding their bicycles in the street, playing cowboys and Indians. And I remember also the days when most houses had big front porches. And on the hot summer day, when you had no air conditioning, families would be sitting out on the front porch, and other families would be walking by, and we would wave at each other. And maybe if some kids went by with their family, we might run off the porch and join them or play with them in the front yard. I don't know in some cities, I don't know whether that's even possible anymore, because most families, if they have a yard, everything is focused behind a high fence in the backyard. And so there's no social life that involves the community. I can even remember when we used to have block parties. So a bunch of the women would get together and they would organize a block party and pick somebody's yard, and Everybody would come and they would bring their chairs and tables and the kids and they'd all share each other's food and spend an evening together. We don't do that anymore. I think it is still possible to start that, but sometimes the only way we're going to be able to do that is networking with friends at church, and let's do it at your house. I remember years ago there was a parish in California where they did that. And so once a month, everybody would get together and they would go to a different person's house and they would bring a potluck sort of meal to share together. And all the kids would come and the kids would be playing in the backyard and the parents would be sitting around, having a beer and eating food together and building a sense of community. We need that. We need to build a sense of community.
This is a good question. I like this question. America Shirts says, what do you think of the Western Rite, and what do you think about using it as a tool for evangelism?
Well, let me tell you, as a Scotsman and as a former Lutheran, I certainly didn't have any kind of experience with the Orthodox Divine Liturgy when I was young. But when I did convert to Orthodoxy, it became mine. All the services here at this monastery are celebrated in English. And there's no way that I look at the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom as being Eastern. It's mine. It belongs to me. It's a part of who I am. It's a part of who my community is. Every member of this monastic community is a convert. The problem I have with Western Rite liturgies is, number one, there are multiple ones, and some have more historical connections than others. Some of them are far later in time. But I remember one Western Rite church that I visited years ago, and this priest of the Antiochian Archdiocese had visited there, and he talked to them about the Jesus prayer. And this particular Western Rite church were former Episcopalians. And he said it was like talking about superstition to them, because he said the people there just not only didn't get it about the Jesus prayer and its importance, but weren't interested. And then he said that he had noted that the people in that parish, including their priests, really didn't feel any connection with the other churches, the Orthodox churches in the area. And I remember even one Greek Orthodox bishop years ago in the Bay Area forbid his priests to concelebrate in the Western Rite, or even to invite Western Rite priests to concelebrate with them. And now I didn't agree with that. I still don't think that was a good idea. But I do think that we need to rethink just what is Western Rite. And why do we think we need to have a Western Rite parish when the Divine Liturgy belongs to all of us? I don't know any. In fact, I know one Orthodox priest who was Western Rite. And after a number of conversations with him, he left it and he joined himself to the Byzantine Rite and is now part of a parish that serves the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. And all of the priests, just about all of them that I know who are close friends, are converts. And I don't know any of them that sees the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom as being Eastern. It's ours. It's been with us for so long. So why do we need to have something that you don't see anywhere else, and something that can be divisive? That's my opinion.
That's an interesting answer. I'm glad that was a good question. Thank you for that question. I'm going to read one more question here, and we might start winding down.
Yeah.
James asks, I'm Church of England Christian. Can I say the Jesus prayer?
Years ago, we had a man who lived in New York City who would routinely be buying multiple Jesus prayer ropes. And neither Father Paul nor I could understand, why is this man in New York City buying so many prayer ropes? Is he losing them? And one day the phone rang and it was Richard. And I said, I have a question for you. Why are you buying so many prayer ropes? Because he'd called to make an order for 4 new prayer ropes. And he says, oh, I'm giving them to my friends and telling them about the Jesus prayer. And I said, what Orthodox church do you attend? Oh, I'm Episcopalian. And so then I asked him, I said, you're probably not aware of it, but from the earliest of times, the Jesus prayer has had a close link with the divine liturgy of the Orthodox Church. And I said, if you want to have the Jesus prayer have the impact, a full impact on your life, the best way to do that is within the context of the Orthodox Church. I said, why don't you look into Orthodoxy? And he says, oh, a good idea. So the man happened to work in a hospital, and he ran into a Greek Orthodox priest who was visiting a patient. So the guy asked the priest about that. He says, this monk told me that I do the Jesus prayer and that, I should be joining myself to Orthodoxy. And the priest said, well, you're welcome to come to my parish. So he showed up at this Greek Orthodox church, and he went and sat down in the front row as a good Anglican would do. And a man came up to him and said, oh, you can't sit here. This is reserved for special guests. And the guy said, well, I'm a special guest of your priest. You cannot sit here. And he wouldn't move. And then 2 men came up to him who were part of the sitting in the back and guiding people and greeting people as they came into the church. And they both came up and said, you cannot sit here. It's special guests only. I am a guest of your priest. I'm not moving. And so finally, he stayed there. And after the service was over with, he went down into the parish hall to have some donuts and coffee with these people. And a whole bunch of these Greek men came up to him and they said, why are you here? Are you Greek? And he said, no, I'm Italian. And they said, well, there's a Catholic church down the street. Why don't you go there? This is a Greek church. It's for Greeks. And he said, basically, he told me, he said, that was the end of my desire to be Orthodox. And he never bought another prayer rope again from us. So that's a good example of the damage that we can do to someone who is journeying towards orthodoxy. We can make it an ethnic thing. And orthodoxy is not about ethnic background. As a Scotsman, God forgive my people, most of them, if they are Christians, are Presbyterians. Oh, my Lord, have mercy. What we are expected to do as we become Orthodox is to embrace the truth that our new nation is not Russian, not Greek, not Arabic. Our new nation is the church. My true nation is the Orthodox Church. And when we do that, there's room for everyone, regardless of color, of race, of ethnic background, or anything. We are members of the nation of Orthodoxy. Let's live like it. And let's invite others who are interested to come and join us. And the best thing we can say to others is, come home.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask my final question. First, I want to say thank you for your time, Abbot Tryphon. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful stream. I know people are going to love it, and they already are loving it. People are saying thank you for your articles, for your videos. This is a question that it's kind of the question I like to ask for people who have religious vocations, mainly. And that is, can you leave us with a word to live by? I know you just gave us a whole hour and a half worth of a word to live by, but do you have a word for us, a final word?
Love on each other. Love on each other. The best way you can share your faith is by being a loving person, putting your heart out to others, letting them know that you care about them, and demonstrating the truth of your Orthodox faith by how you're living your life. Become a magnet so that others can find the truth. May God help us all. Love you.
Okay. I love you too. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And good afternoon or goodbye, everybody.
So that was recorded.